So, after learning that 80% of businesses fail while going internationally, so what are the reasons for this? And most of the time, if you do research, culture is something that is bound to be a reason for most of the business failures. So, let us evaluate the role of culture while selling in international markets. What is culture? Let us understand this concept first. So, culture is the distinctive way of life of a people that is not biologically transmitted, right. So, such learned behavior is passed on from one generation to the next, evolving and changing over time from generation to generation. So, the culture in which a person lives affect their consumption patterns as well, and perception of specific products and meanings stretched to them, or the meanings associated with those products. So, because of this, only certain products and selling practices that the individual perceives as normal and acceptable as per his or her own kind of culture gets acceptance from those kind of consumers. So, when selling overseas, firms must be culturally sensitive. So, culture is defined as something which is the characteristics human product of social interaction, provides socially acceptable patterns for meeting biological and social needs. Culture is cumulative, for it is handed down from one generation to the next one, even in a society. Culture is meaningful to human beings because of its symbolic quality as well. Culture is learned by each person in the course of his development in a particular society. That's why it is called as a learned behavior. Culture is therefore a basic determinant of personality itself for any customer, and it depends for its existence upon the continued functioning of society, but is independent by any individual or group. So, culture is a collective term which is adopted and which is something which is taken in a collective manner, and not just kind of it's an independent of any individual or group as well. It's form of the kind of community. That is how a particular culture is defined. So, culture, which is a very intriguing but complex factor, is often a very critical component of business environment as well. So, cultural differences are the most significant and troublesome variables encountered by the multinational companies across the globe. For example, during the 1994 World Cup, bottles of Henken beer, a brand of beer, Henken, displayed the flags of all the participants while there is soccer's biggest tournament is going on, including the flag of Saudi Arabia. The country's flag shows a verse from Quran, Islam's holy book. The Quran forbids the use or consumption of alcohol. So thousands of Muslim kind of sports lovers registered complaints against the Henkin or the brand with the brewer for displaying the verse on that particular beer bottles. Then what are the cultural values? The most useful information on how cultural values influence various types of business and markets comes from a research work or seminal work of Geert Hofstede. So, he studied more than 90,000 people across 66 countries. He found that the cultures of the nation differed along 4 primary dimensions. One, there is power distance index. Second one is individualism, collectivity or collective index, uncertainty-avoidance index, and the masculinity femininity index. Additionally, again subsequent studies have identified 5th and 6th dimension, which are long term orientation, and then the 6th one is indulgence, or a kind of society which is like indulgence or restraint society. So, this Hofstede's work has provided us these 6 kind of cultural values on which we can kind of compare countries with respect to each other. So, first dimension is power distance. So, cultures that endorse low power distance expect and accept power relations that are more consultative or democratic. People relate to one another in this type of culture more as equals, regardless of their formal positions they enjoy. So, for instance, people tend to communicate with each other on a first name basis, right. So, subordinates are more comfortable with demanding the right to contribute to and critique the decision making of those in power as well. Whereas, in high power distance countries, the less powerful accept power relations that are more autocratic and paternalistic. Subordinates here acknowledge the power of others simply based on where they stand in that particular hierarchy. So, this would have a major bearing on the structuring of your sole sales force when you are planning to go international, since the hierarchical level of the salesperson affects their ability to interact on a meaningful level with the potential customer as well. Second dimension of cultural value is uncertainty avoidance. So this refers to society's tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity. It reflects the extent to which members of society attempt to cope with anxiety by minimizing uncertainty. So people in culture with high uncertainty avoidance tend to minimize the occurrence of unknown and unusual circumstances. They tend to proceed with careful step by step changes by planning and by implementing rules, laws, and regulations. By contrast, low uncertainty avoidance cultures accept and feel comfortable in unstructured situations or changeable environments and try to have as few rules as possible. People in these cultures tend to be more tolerant of change. So that's kind of another dimension of culture. Third one is masculinity and femininity. So masculine cultures value competitiveness, assertiveness, materialism, ambition, and power, whereas feminine cultures place more values on relationships and quality of life. So in masculine cultures, the differences between gender roles are more dramatic and less fluid than in feminine cultures, where men and women have same values emphasizing modesty and caring. Fourth dimension, long-term orientation and short-term orientation. So long-term oriented societies attach more importance to the future. They foster pragmatic values oriented towards rewards, including persistence, savings, and capacity for adaptation as well. In short-term oriented societies, values prompted are more related to the past and the present, including steadiness, respect for tradition, saving face, reciprocation, and even fulfilling social obligations. Individualism versus collectivism. So in individualistic societies, the stress is put on personal achievement and individual rights. By contrast, in collectivistic societies, individuals act predominantly as members of a lifelong and cohesive group or organization. So what is the focus is on whether individual achievements should be rewarded, or it's a group that has excelled, and then you need to reward that particular group, entire group as it is. So a salesperson from a collectivistic nation would need permission from the group before taking actions, which could be frustrating for a customer who is from an individualistic nation and wants to take action in their own interest and wants to reach an agreement quickly. So that kind of conflicts might arise when you are dealing with a customer who is coming from individualistic culture, who values to take his own decision by his own or her own, and then you are salesperson and you are who is coming from a collectivistic society, who always ask, or who will be always needing a guidance from the superiors. Another dimension is indulgence versus restraint. Societies with a high rate of indulgence allow hedonistic behaviors, so people can freely satisfy their basic needs and desires, whereas by contrast, in restraint societies have strict social norms whereby gratification of desire is suppressed and regulated always. So one can visit the hofstadtinsights.com, a website created based on the research that is done by Hofstede. You can select different countries like India versus Japan versus US, three countries across the globe, and you can see the differences across these three countries with respect to cultural dimensions that we just studied. That is power distance. For example, the first dimension, India scores high as compared to even Japan and US, whereas in terms of individualism, you can see that US gets more score as compared to India and Japan. That means how a particular culture is made up of, what is the cultural threats that are how they are behaving at particular level. So culture includes both abstract and material elements. So abstract elements include values, attitudes, ideas, and religion. These are learned patterns of behavior that are transmitted from one generation to another. Material elements of the culture are levels and type of technology and consumption patterns within that particular society. So Prahalad and Doz provided this integration and responsiveness model to be a valuable model that can portray the approach that firms may adopt in their international operations. So this is something what they propose. So we have integration on one axis and then we have responsiveness on the other axis. And then companies need to find out the pace or place or in this particular kind of dimensions where they want to be in that particular on those particular two dimensions, what kind of sort of kind of strength or weaknesses that their resources provide them. So best strategy here is to think global and act local. So score very high on responsiveness, at the same time integrate those kind of functions within your organization while adopting that particular culture. So according to this model given by Prahalad and Doz integration and responsiveness model, a firm may opt to maintain its standardized products across its international markets, or it can choose to adopt its products offerings according to the cultural needs. So there are two options. You are taking the product as it is, like having the same product or standardized products across the globe or across the markets, or you can adapt that particular model to particular country that you are trying to reach out to. So however, according to this model, sustained competitiveness would ideally be achieved only if the company's practices kind of balance of think global and act local. So subsequently, not only would the firms and its employees be able to integrate fully within culture, but they would also be able to respond appropriately to the cultural demands of that particular country while meeting your business objectives, and that's creating kind of a win-win situation for both businesses as well as customers. Now there are, apart from this culture, it has different kind of sub dimension as well. Within that particular culture, we have to look at language, which is a major area of cultural conflict that revolves around the use of language itself. So for communication to effectively take place, the meaning of various words and phrases must be clear. Let's look at some interesting examples. Coca-Cola. So they named their product a Chinese phrase that would sound like the original name. However, this new phrase translated to bite the wax tadpole in Chinese language. So this didn't go over well with the brand. Again, their competitor, the rival, Pepsi, they brought a new slogan to the Chinese market. It was Pepsi brings you back to life. However, unfortunately, the phrase translated to Pepsi brings your ancestors back to life. So both companies, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, had to revamp their Chinese campaigns again so as to use kind of appropriate language to connect with their customers. Let's look at some more blunders. So in 1987, when Kentucky Fried Chicken, popularly known as KFC, they opened its first outlet in Beijing, again in China. Its slogan, finger licking good, was incorrectly translated as eat your fingers off, right? Another example, Toyota's Fiera proved controversial in Puerto Rico, one of the Atlantic or American company, where Fiera translates to ugly old woman, and who wants to have that kind of vehicle, right? Coming to the next example, in order to appeal to first class customers, airline industry, Braniff International Airlines created a campaign to promote their fully upholstered seats, but it backfired after their slogan fly in leather, which actually translated into Spanish as fly naked. So nobody would like to fly naked, right? So Ford's Pinto, again another example, which failed to make an impact in Brazilian market. The reason behind its flop was the name Pinto, which translated to tiny male genitals in Brazilian Portuguese language or slang. Another example, when the Honda Fitta was introduced to Nordic countries, see the brands where they are coming from and which the countries they are targeted or opening into or going into. So Honda from this Asian company coming to the Nordic cultures. In 2001, it quickly had to rename the brand Honda Fitta to Honda Jazz, as Fitta translated to female genitalia in that particular Nordic countries. And then General Motors, which introduced Chevy Nova in Latin America, but were appalled by the fact that it bumbled. So they soon realized that the folly when someone pointed that Nova translates to it doesn't go in Spanish. So most of the Latin American people speak Spanish, and GM's logo or a tagline for that particular brand Nova is something which is translated into it doesn't go, and who will want to drive that vehicle which doesn't move or go, right? So there are some interesting examples one can have a look at. So a key Key ingredient in international selling is a command of foreign language. So, as one of the German chancellor previously, that Willy Brandt once said, if I am selling to you, I'll speak English, but if you are selling to me, Dan must say das sprechen. What does it mean? That means you should must learn German as well because I am German. So, salespeople also need to understand both the nuances of foreign language, and not just nuances of foreign language or meaning, but even the silent and non-verbal language cues present in that particular foreign language as well. So, example, a salesperson needs to know that in Japanese, yes often means no, but that a Chinese no often means yes. That's kind of non-verbal or even verbal silent cues one should be aware of when interacting with international clients or customers. Another factor under culture is aesthetics. So, this refers to a culture's ideas concerning beauty and good taste, together with an appropriate of color and form. So, aesthetics deals with what a society finds beautiful and visually appealing. So, usually, what is seen as visually appropriate by the individual is based upon their cultural makeup. This could certainly affect the potential salesperson from a dress and appearance standpoint of view. So, how your sales force is kind of getting ready for the sales calls. If they are meeting the customers with one-on-one meetings, the dressing and kind of professional kind of appearance takes front seat. So, the exporter must be aware of positive and negative aspect of its design, packaging, advertising as well. So, the company should be sensitive to local preferences and tests, and items such as company logos should incorporate local preferences, and these should be negotiated during the early stages of the sale. Another factor under culture is religion. Material culture and aesthetics are outward manifestations of a culture and give an indication of how consumers in a particular culture behave. But that's an outward manifestation of a culture. If you want to go deep on understand the internal manifestation of cultures, you have to look at the religious practices adopted or followed by those customers. The firm selling overseas needs an understanding of why consumers behave in the way they are behaving. So, the religion practiced by culture can give insight into its members' behavior. A company must be aware of religious differences in its foreign markets and be prepared to make adaptations both in selling operations and in the product of themselves. So, it is not just required to adapt your product to a particular culture. By understanding religion, you can also learn how to sell that product, how to approach to a particular customer coming from a different country, what kind of religious practices he or she might be practicing, that drives their interactions when meeting in a face-to-face meeting as well. So, religious holidays, celebrations, obligations can affect hours of operation that are imposed on the salesperson. So, times may need to be kept open for the salesperson to pray, and followers may not work during these religious seasons. So, religion can also shape an individual's feeling about dealing with males and females in a business setting. So, in some countries, women are expected to be subservient in all ways to men, even to walk behind them in those cases as well. So, how can a potential male customer, if this is the situation that if some in one of the culture, let's say X country, if it is required that women should follow men, then how can a potential male customer in this type of environment develop a long-term relationship with a female salesperson, right? So, these type of situations set up conflicts that can be extremely stressful for that particular individual as well. Education, again, analyzing educational information for relevant markets gives the firm an insight into the nature and sophistication of customers one can expect from that country. So, the success of this sales communication will be kind of constrained by the general level of education within the culture. If consumers are largely illiterate, then company communications will need to be adopted considering the education level of those customers. So, further, sales contracts may have to be verbally negotiated and simply confirm in writing without any implied long 10-page terms and conditions and all, because of the education level of that particular customer coming from that particular country. Global salespersons, now how to use these cultural factors in international selling. We have global salespersons encountering resistance from customers in different cultures. So often this is due to global salespersons not understanding the do's and don'ts that we just discussed before interacting with this cultural different cultures. So understanding how to act in most cultures may be the difference between closing a sale and losing a customer. So here are a few examples of some specific do's and don'ts one should take care while dealing in certain cultures. For China, always accept and drink tea during business meetings. Even if you are offered dozens of cups in each or for a particular day, never eat or drink before your host does so. So that's kind of etiquette or kind of cultural practice is there in China. Coming to France, the French normally do not meet until 10 a.m. So do not offer to meet or do not schedule a meeting before a breakfast. Germany, there one do not address a business associate by their first name unless you are invited to do so. So never schedule again a breakfast meeting when dealing with German clients. Coming to Latin America, the clock is not taken seriously here in this continent. So do not schedule more than 2 meetings during the day because you are not going to complete your already scheduled 2 meetings in a day. So they may take so much long that you in an entire day you might end up doing only 1 or 2 meetings at max. Coming to Japan, so do not raise business issues on the golf course unless you are unless your host initiates the conversation. So they strictly segment their time to give an activity. So they don't want to discuss any business issues while having their own time or playing golfs, those kind of activities. So general cultural attitudes and values again varies across cultures. So for example, spiritual value, if you talk about, West follows different kind of spiritual values as compared to East, right? Again, the time values in Latin America, as I said, they don't follow the clock, but in West they are very particular about the timing. And coming to Spain, an European country, they will always have first preference for their family members, and then if there is something, they will handle that they will attend those kind of family and friends first, and they will give secondary weightage or say a preference to their business meetings. Coming to the concept of space as well. So in, let's for example, office sizes in West, bigger is better. So the big office will indicate that you are having some power position and all, but in East they don't care. Even the CEO will sit on the floor and he will have a lunch or dinner with their team. So distance, again, West and Middle East and Latin America have this different kind of concept related to distance as well, right? So the Chinese culture and sales negotiation is a particular case here I want to discuss. So they follow something called as a Gongxi networks. So in China, relationships are valued much. So they will take so much time to build a relationship, to trust you as someone who is provider of products and services. But once you are in their network of trustworthy people, they always make it that the relationships last for a very long time. So they practice something which is called as a Gongxi networks, which are relationships or social connections based on mutual interest and benefits. So here Gong means gate or hurdle, and Z means tie or relationship or even a connection. So therefore Gongxi literally means pass the gate and get connected. So they will take so much time for you to earn their trust, but once you gain that kind of a spot, it really makes a long lasting relationships. So that sums up this particular session where we just looked at how a culture can help you excel or even fail in going internationally with your products and services. Thank you.